Prince pretends to sleep to test. Shy servant, what she does makes him fall in love. A prince lies in the garden, eyes closed, waiting to see the truth. The shy servant girl believes no one watches. Instead of fleeing or boasting, she kneels, drapes her own shawl across him, and whispers a prayer over his weary soul. But kindness has enemies. Whispers fill the halls, rumors of ambition, lies of theft, forged by jealous hands. In a world where a servant's word is nothing, one accusation could banish her forever. Yet hidden in dusty records lies a secret about her father, a truth powerful enough to shake the palace. Will her quiet grace be crushed beneath scandal? Or will love strong enough to defy a kingdom change everything? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late spring sunshine dappled the palace gardens as Prince Edmund of Westervale made his way toward a secluded marble bench beneath an ancient lime tree. His shoulders felt heavy with the weight of the morning's council meetings, where endless discussions about grain tariffs and border disputes had tested even his considerable patience. A gentle breeze stirred the lime tree's heart-shaped leaves, carrying the sweet perfume of nearby rose beds. Edmund glanced around the deserted garden path, then deliberately arranged himself on the cool marble bench. He positioned his body just so, one arm draped carelessly across his chest, his breathing measured and slow. Beside him, he placed his leather-bound volume of classical poetry, its spine carefully loosened beforehand. He had observed the young maid Clara during her duties over the past fortnight. There was something different about her, a gentleness, a quiet dignity that set her apart. The way she tended the gardens spoke of genuine care rather than mere obligation. Now, he waited to see what she would do when confronted with a seemingly sleeping prince. The soft scratch of a broom against gravel announced her arrival. Through barely opened eyes, Edmund watched as Clara approached, her simple gray dress and white cap neat despite her work among the flower beds. She paused when she noticed him, her broom held still in suddenly uncertain hands. Edmund maintained his facade of sleep, curious to see her reaction. Would she hurry away, as protocol dictated? Or perhaps stand and stare, as so many did when they thought themselves unobserved? Clara did neither. She stood for a long moment, clearly wrestling with some internal debate. Then she set her broom carefully against a nearby tree and approached with silent steps. Edmund forced himself to keep his breathing steady as she drew near. "Poor Your Highness," she whispered, her voice barely stirring the air. "The burden you carry must be so heavy." To Edmund's surprise, she unwrapped the worn but clean shawl from her shoulders. With movements as gentle as a mother tending a sleeping child, she draped it over him. The simple wool carried the faint scent of lavender and sunshine. "Dear Lord," she murmured, "grant him strength for his duties, and wisdom to guide our people." The earnest prayer, spoken so softly, touched something in Edmund's heart he hadn't known was there. Clara's attention then turned to the book beside him. She lifted it with careful hands, examining the loosened binding with a practiced eye. Edmund watched through his lashes as she reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a length of sturdy ribbon, pale blue and freshly washed. With deft movements that spoke of experience, she wrapped the ribbon around the book's spine, securing the loosened sections. Her fingers moved quickly but with great care, treating the volume as if it were a precious treasure rather than just one of thousands in the palace library. "There now," she whispered, returning the book to its place. "That should hold until proper repairs can be made." She stepped back then, gathering her shawl with careful movements. For a moment, she simply looked at him, and Edmund was struck by the genuine concern in her expression. There was no artifice there, no seeking of advantage, only simple human kindness. Then she retrieved her broom and continued down the path, her steps as quiet as she could make them. The soft swish of bristles against gravel grew fainter as she moved away. Edmund waited until she had turned the corner before sitting up. He lifted the book, running his fingers over the neatly tied ribbon. The simple repair had been skillfully done, speaking of both practical knowledge and caring attention to detail. A faint smile touched his lips as he considered what he had witnessed. In all his years at court, surrounded by those seeking royal favor, he had rarely encountered such sincere, unaffected kindness. Someone who would pray for his strength, repair his book, and depart without seeking recognition or reward. It was as refreshing as the spring breeze that still carried the scent of roses. He held the ribbon between his fingers, this small token of care freely given. His curiosity about Clara Whitcomb, he realized, had only grown stronger. Steam rose from the copper pots in the palace kitchen as Clara worked, her sleeves rolled up past her elbows. The rough cloth she used to polish the brass made her fingers ache, but she kept at her task with steady determination. Around her, the morning bustle of the kitchen filled the air with clattering dishes and the rich scent of baking bread. "Did you hear?" Martha, one of the younger maids, whispered to her friend while rolling pastry dough. "Sarah's been moved up to chamber duties on the second floor." "Second floor," Betty exclaimed, nearly dropping the bowl she carried. "That's where the visiting nobles stay. However did she manage that?" Clara kept her head down, focusing on the stubborn tarnish that marred the pot's surface. She had learned long ago that listening to gossip only led to trouble, yet the words drifted to her ears anyway. "Cook says it's because she caught the housekeeper's eye," Martha continued, always keeping her apron spotless and such. The kitchen door swung open with a creak, and Mrs. Thimbleton, the head housemaid, appeared in her starched black dress. "Clara Whitcomb," she called, her voice cutting through the chatter. "You're to report to Mr. Patterson in the outer hall. He has new duties for you." Clara's heart skipped. Had she done something wrong? She set down her cleaning cloth and wiped her hands on her apron, conscious of every eye in the kitchen following her movement. The outer hall gleamed with morning light streaming through tall windows. Mr. Patterson, the butler, stood as rigid as the marble columns surrounding him. "You'll be serving refreshments here," he informed her, gesturing to a polished silver tray laden with delicate china. "The morning petitioners will require tea and small cakes while they wait for their audiences." Clara blinked in surprise. Serving in the outer hall was considered choice work, no heavy scrubbing, no harsh soaps to redden one's hands. "Sir," she began hesitantly, "are you certain I'm the one you want?" "Unless there's another Clara Whitcomb in service," he replied dryly. "Take your position by the east wall. Remember, speak only when spoken to." As Clara arranged the cups on her tray, she sent up a silent prayer of thanks. Surely this change was a blessing, a reward for her diligence. The work would be easier on her mother too, no more worrying about Clara's reddened hands and aching back. What Clara didn't notice, as she served tea with quiet grace, was Lady Isolde's sharp gaze following her every movement from the gallery above. The lady's green silk skirts rustled as she tracked her cousin Edmund's unusual appearances in the hall that morning. 3 times the prince passed through, each time pausing briefly near where Clara stood with her tray. 3 times he found some reason to linger, examining a tapestry, discussing the weather with a courtier, adjusting the seal on his jacket. Lady Isolde's fingers tightened on the carved balustrade. She had known Edmund since childhood, had watched his habits and movements for years. This was not his usual pattern. When darkness fell and the palace settled into evening quiet, Clara climbed the narrow servants' stairs to her attic chamber. The small room felt warm and welcoming after the long day. She lit a single candle, its gentle light catching the worn pages of her mother's Bible on the little table. Kneeling beside her narrow bed, Clara clasped her hands together. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for this unexpected kindness. Help me serve well in my new duties." The flame flickered, casting her shadow on the wall as she prayed. At that same hour, in her luxurious chambers on the noble's floor, Lady Isolde sat before her gilded vanity mirror. Her lady's maid had been dismissed, leaving her alone with her thoughts and her reflection. The candlelight caught the emeralds at her throat but couldn't quite hide the hardness in her eyes. "A serving maid," she murmured, running a silver brush through her dark hair. "A common little nothing," catching Edmund's eye. Her lips curved into a cruel smile as she set down the brush. "We shall see about that. I'll crush this foolish fancy before it can take root." The mirror reflected her beautiful face, composed and confident. No mere maid would stand between her and her ambitions. Of that, Lady Isolde was absolutely certain. The sunlight streamed through the palace chapel's stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the polished wooden pews. Clara stood with the other servants at the back of the church, her prayer book held close to her chest. The familiar scent of beeswax candles and aged wood filled the air as the morning service proceeded. Though her eyes remained mostly downcast in proper servant fashion, she couldn't help but notice Prince Edmund's tall figure in the nobles section. Just once, their gazes met across the divide of the center aisle. It lasted only a heartbeat before Clara looked away, her cheeks warming despite her best efforts to maintain composure. As the congregation filed out after the final hymn, Lady Isolde's melodious voice carried clearly through the chapel anteroom. "Did you see how that maid stared at His Highness throughout the service? Most unseemly." She stood among a cluster of minor nobles, her emerald silk gown rustling as she leaned in conspiratorially. "I hear she's quite clever about placing herself where the prince might notice her." Clara's heart sank as several ladies tittered behind their fans. She hurried past, clutching her worn prayer book tighter, but not before catching more of Lady Isolde's words floating on the air. "One must wonder what ambitions lurk behind such a modest facade. Why, I've heard she's even managed to escape her proper duties below stairs." The whispers spread like autumn leaves in the wind. By midday, Clara felt the change in the air as clearly as an approaching storm. In the servants' dining hall, chairs scraped against the floor as several maids stood and moved away when she approached their usual table. Her childhood friend Mary shot her an apologetic glance but remained seated with the others. "I've known Clara since we were girls," she heard Cook defending her in the kitchen. "She's not got an ambitious bone in her body." But others weren't so kind. "Well, someone must have helped her get easier duties," came the sharp reply. "And we all know how that usually happens." Clara forced herself to hold her head high, though each cold shoulder and suspicious glance cut deep. She focused on her work, serving tea trays with steady hands despite her inner turmoil. When young Tom, one of the scullery boys, was missing from the evening meal, she wrapped 2 rolls in her apron without hesitation. The palace corridors were quiet as Clara made her way to the servants' quarters that evening. What she didn't know was that Prince Edmund followed at a careful distance, watching as she knocked softly at Tom's door. "How's the fever, dear one?" her gentle voice carried in the stillness. The boy's weak cough answered before his words. "Better, miss. But Cook said I mustn't work tomorrow neither." "Then you must eat to keep up your strength." Clara settled on the edge of his narrow bed, drawing the bread from her apron. "Cook sent these special, with honey butter inside." It was a small lie, but one that brought a smile to Tom's pale face as he accepted the offering. Clara smoothed his blanket and began humming softly, an old lullaby her mother once sang to her. From his hidden vantage point, Edmund watched the scene unfold. Here was the truth of Clara's character, not in the vicious rumors or suspicious whispers, but in this quiet moment of kindness when she thought no one was watching. Later, in his private chambers, Edmund paced before the fireplace. The ribbon Clara had used to repair his book lay across his palm, a simple strip of serviceable cotton, yet he found himself running his thumb across its worn softness again and again. His position demanded he consider Isolde's warnings. After all, she was family, and her concern for the dignity of the crown seemed genuine enough. But Edmund had seen with his own eyes how Clara treated those who could offer her nothing in return. The memory of her tender care for the sick child stood in stark contrast to Isolde's gleaming smile and carefully crafted accusations. He closed his fingers around the ribbon, coming to rest before the warmth of the fire. The flame's glow cast dancing shadows across his features as he stood lost in thought, weighing duty against the evidence of his own observations. There was more to learn about this quiet maid who had caught his attention so unexpectedly. The afternoon sun draped golden, the light through the apple trees as Clara made her way through the palace orchard. Her woven basket swung gently at her side, ready to be filled with the herbs cook had requested. The sweet scent of early summer blooms filled the air, and bees hummed lazily among the scattered wildflowers. Clara knelt beside a patch of thyme, her plain brown skirt spread around her. The familiar task of gathering herbs brought comfort after days of whispered rumors and sideways glances from her fellow servants. Here, among the honest growing things, she could breathe freely. "Good day to you, miss." The quiet voice startled her. Clara looked up to find a young man in simple riding clothes standing a few paces away. Though his attire was plain, something in his bearing made her scramble to her feet and curtsy deeply. "Good day, sir," she murmured, keeping her eyes lowered as proper. "Pray, do not let me disturb your work." His voice held warmth that made her dare a glance upward. The nobleman, for surely he was one, despite his dress, had kind eyes and an encouraging smile. "I often walk here myself, finding peace among the trees." Clara nodded, uncertain whether to continue her task or wait for dismissal. The stranger solved her dilemma by kneeling himself to examine the herbs. "You seem well versed in the garden's offerings," he observed. "Yes, sir. My father taught me much of plants and their uses before he passed." The words slipped out before she could stop them. "Your father?" Something in his tone invited confidence. Clara's fingers traced the edge of her basket. "He was steward to the old Duke of Mersham, sir. He served faithfully for 20 years until fever took him 3 winters past. A noble profession, serving with such dedication." The gentleman's voice grew soft. "And now? My mother and I manage, sir. She takes in fine mending, and I—" Clara gestured vaguely at her worn apron and the herbs. "We are blessed with honest work in the palace." He studied her face. "Yet it cannot be easy, supporting a household of 2. We have our faith, sir." Clara smiled slightly, touching the small cross at her throat. "The good Lord provides, though sometimes in ways we least expect." A thoughtful expression crossed his features. "Indeed, I find such trust remarkable in these cynical times." They fell into surprisingly comfortable conversation as Clara carefully selected herbs and the stranger asked intelligent questions about their uses. She found herself speaking more freely than she had in days, sharing small stories of her father's wisdom and her mother's quiet strength. The gentleman listened intently, his eyes warm with genuine interest. There was something familiar about him that Clara couldn't quite place, but his manner was so kind that she set aside her usual caution. "Your father sounds like a man of true character," he said, "to raise a daughter with such." The sudden crunch of approaching footsteps on the gravel path made them both turn. Clara glimpsed the livery of one of the under-gardeners through the trees. "I must go," the stranger said quickly, already stepping back into the shadows of a large apple tree. "Thank you for sharing your story, miss." But Clara never heard if he meant to ask her name, for he had vanished between the trees as swiftly as a summer breeze. She blinked, wondering if she had imagined the entire encounter. The under-gardener passed with only a brief nod, and Clara hurried to finish gathering the herbs cook needed. Her mind kept returning to the strange conversation as she made her way back to the kitchens, puzzling over the nobleman's interest in her simple life. "Here are the herbs, cook," she said, setting her basket on the broad wooden table. "About time, girl," Cook replied, but not unkindly. "Everything fresh and proper?" "Yes, cook." Clara began sorting the herbs into neat bundles. I met a nobleman in the orchard. He was most courteous." "Did you now?" Cook barely glanced up from her work. "Well, mind you keep to your duties and don't go getting ideas above your station." "Of course not," Clara murmured, though she couldn't help wondering at the gentleman's gentle manner and thoughtful questions. How strange that he had spoken to her as though her opinions mattered, as though her father's life of service was something worthy of respect. She tied the last bundle of thyme with a piece of twine, still pondering the encounter. Whoever he had been, his kindness had lifted her spirits more than she cared to admit. Through tall windows, afternoon sunlight streamed into the ducal archives, casting long shadows between towering shelves of leather-bound records. Prince Edmund's footsteps echoed softly on the marble floor as he made his way through the quiet chamber. The musty scent of aged paper and ink filled the air, while dust motes danced in the golden shafts of light. "Master Thaddeus?" Edmund called out softly, his voice carrying through the silence. The elderly librarian emerged from behind a stack of manuscripts, his silver spectacles catching the light. "Your Highness?" The old man bowed slightly, his weathered hands clutching a ledger. "How may I be of service?" "I seek records of a steward who died in service some years past, a man named Whitcomb." Edmund's voice was gentle but purposeful. Master Thaddeus's eyes brightened with recognition. "Ah, yes, a sad tale, that one. Follow me, if you please, Your Highness." The librarian led Edmund through narrow passages between the shelves, his steps slow but sure. At last, he pulled out a heavy volume bound in faded blue leather. "Here we are, the service records from 7 years past." Edmund leaned over the thick book as Master Thaddeus carefully turned its pages. The old man's finger traced down columns of neat script until it stopped at an entry. "Here, Your Highness. Thomas Whitcomb, steward to Lord Blackmore." Edmund read the account with growing solemnity. During a raid by highway brigands, Thomas Whitcomb had thrown himself between Lord Blackmore and an attacker's blade. Though the Lord survived, Whitcomb did not. The entry ended with a simple note: "Died in service of the realm." "Was there no pension awarded?" Edmund asked, his brow furrowed. Master Thaddeus shook his head sadly. "Lord Blackmore himself passed away mere weeks later from fever. In the confusion of his heir taking over the estate, I fear Whitcomb's sacrifice was overlooked." Edmund's jaw tightened. "This shall be rectified," he said quietly, more to himself than to the librarian. "Thank you, Master Thaddeus. You've been most helpful." In the days that followed, Edmund worked carefully through his private secretary to arrange matters. A modest but respectable pension was established, backdated for 7 years, with the accumulated sum to be delivered immediately to Widow Whitcomb in her countryside cottage. All was handled with the utmost discretion, the source of the funds obscured through proper channels. 1 week later, Clara stood in the servants' hall, a letter clutched in her trembling hands. The seal was broken, and tears glistened in her eyes as she read her mother's words by the light of a guttering candle. "My dearest Clara," the letter read, "I hardly know how to tell you of the miracle that has occurred. Yesterday, a messenger arrived with a purse and documents from the duchy. It seems your dear father's service has at last been remembered and honored. We are granted a pension, backdated to his passing. My child, we need struggle no more." Clara pressed the letter to her heart, her lips moving in silent prayer. The candlelight cast a soft glow on her face, illuminating the mix of joy and wonder in her expression. Unknown to her, high above in the shadowed gallery overlooking the servants' hall, Edmund stood in silence. He watched as Clara wiped happy tears from her cheeks, as she carefully folded the precious letter and tucked it into her apron pocket. His heart swelled to see her joy, yet twisted with an unexpected guilt. He had done right, he knew this. A long overdue debt had been paid, justice served to a faithful servant's memory. Yet as he observed Clara's quiet celebration, Edmund felt the weight of his secrecy. He longed to step forward, to tell her that her father's sacrifice was not forgotten, that her family's loyalty meant something. But such a revelation would raise too many questions about his interest in her circumstances. So he remained in the shadows of the gallery, both warmed by the sight of her happiness and chilled by the distance he must maintain. The candle below flickered, casting Clara's shadow long against the wall, while Edmund stood above, a silent witness to the joy and hope he had secretly restored. The palace's music room glowed with the light of 100 beeswax candles. Their gentle flames danced across gilded walls and cast warm shadows over the assembled nobility. Clara stood near the refreshment table, her hands steady despite her racing heart as she arranged crystal goblets on a silver tray. The chamber musicians tuned their instruments while courtiers settled into their seats. Clara couldn't help but notice how Prince Edmund directed the seating arrangements with subtle gestures, guiding guests until, whether by chance or design, an empty chair remained near where she would serve. As the first notes of a violin sonata filled the air, Clara moved carefully between the seated guests, offering wine with practiced grace. Her simple gray dress whispered against the floor, a quiet counterpoint to the rustle of silk and satin worn by the ladies of the court. "Some wine, if you please." Prince Edmund's voice was soft, meant for her ears alone. Clara approached, willing her hands not to tremble as she poured the deep red liquid into his crystal goblet. "Your Highness," she murmured, eyes downcast as protocol demanded. But the prince shifted slightly, allowing their conversation to be masked by the music. "The composer speaks to the heart, does he not?" Edmund observed quietly. "Each note carries both beauty and burden." Clara hesitated, then found courage in the sheltering melody. "Like life itself, Your Highness, joy and trial, woven together in God's design." A ghost of a smile touched Edmund's lips. "You have wisdom beyond your years, Miss Whitcomb." He reached for his wineglass just as she adjusted its position, and for one breathless moment, their fingers nearly met. The almost touch sent a shock through Clara's entire being. She withdrew her hand as if burned, horror rising in her chest at such impropriety. But when she dared glance at the prince, his expression held no reproach, only a warmth that made her heart flutter traitorously. Throughout the evening, Edmund found small occasions to speak with her. His comments seemed innocent enough to others' observations about the music, quiet requests for wine, but each interaction carried deeper meanings. They spoke of faith, of duty, of finding light in dark moments. Clara found herself sharing thoughts she'd never dared voice before, about how music could lift the spirit even in the hardest times. "Like prayer," she whispered during one such exchange, "it reminds us we're not alone." "No," Edmund agreed softly, "we are never truly alone." The concert lasted 2 hours, but to Clara it seemed both an eternity and a heartbeat. When the final notes faded and the guests began to disperse, she felt as though she were waking from a dream. The reality of what had transpired, these intimate conversations with the prince himself, crashed over her like a wave of icy water. Later, in her tiny attic chamber, Clara paced the worn floorboards by candlelight, her hand pressed against her chest, trying to still the wild beating of her heart. The memory of that almost touch burned like fire, and the weight of Edmund's gentle gazes felt like a physical thing. "Surely such thoughts are sin," she whispered into the darkness, her voice trembling. To dream above one's station, to dare to think. She couldn't even complete the thought. Instead, she sank to her knees beside her narrow bed, begging God for guidance. In his private study, Edmund sat at his desk, a leather-bound journal open before him. The scratch of his quill filled the quiet room as he wrote by lamplight, recording his thoughts of the evening. He paused, considering his words carefully, then wrote with firm conviction, "She has the soul of a queen." He traced the words with his fingertip, knowing the truth of them even as he recognized the thorny path ahead. The candle beside him guttered in a draught, casting shifting shadows across the page, but the words remained clear and unwavering, like his growing certainty about Clara Whitcomb. The harsh rapping of knuckles against wood jolted Clara from her sleep. Before she could gather her wits, 2 palace guards burst through her chamber door, their faces grim in the pre-dawn darkness. "Come with us," the taller guard commanded, seizing her arm. "Now." Clara barely had time to wrap her shawl around her nightdress as they pulled her from her narrow bed. Her heart thundered in her chest as they marched her through the servant corridors, their grip unyielding. The stone floors felt ice-cold beneath her bare feet. "Please," she whispered. "What have I done?" Neither guard answered as they led her toward the great hall. Through windows high above, the first pale light of dawn cast long shadows across the marble floors. To her horror, Clara saw that the hall was already filled with nobles in their mourning attire, whispering behind jeweled fans and pointing at her disheveled state. Lady Isolde stood near the Duke's throne, her face a mask of righteous indignation. In her hands, she clutched several papers, which she presented to the Duke with a flourish. "Your Grace," Isolde's voice rang clear across the hall, "I regret to bring such grave news, but I discovered these records last night. They prove beyond doubt that this servant girl has been stealing jewels from the royal treasury." Clara's knees weakened. "No, Your Grace, I would never silence." The Duke's command echoed off the stone walls. His stern face showed no mercy as he examined the papers. "These documents show a pattern of theft spanning months. Items missing from the treasury match perfectly with visits to your mother in the countryside." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks as she searched the crowd desperately for a friendly face. Her gaze found Prince Edmund, standing rigid beside his father's throne. Their eyes met for the briefest moment before he looked away, his jaw clenched tight. "My Lord Duke," Clara pleaded, her voice trembling, "I beg you to believe me. I have never taken anything. My mother and I live simply, honestly." Lady Isolde cut her off with a cruel laugh. "Oh, yes, so honestly that you send her gifts of sapphires and pearls? The evidence is clear in these ledgers." The assembled nobles muttered and shook their heads. Clara recognized the sounds of scandal-hungry vultures, eager to see someone fall. She felt dizzy with fear and confusion. The Duke rose from his throne, his voice cold as winter frost. "We cannot allow such behavior to taint the reputation of this household. For the sake of appearances and the honor of Westervale, you will be dismissed from service immediately." He paused, his expression hardening further. "Furthermore, you are hereby exiled from our lands. Should you return, you will face imprisonment." Clara's world spun. Exile meant leaving her position, her home, her small measure of security, all built on years of honest work. "Please," she whispered, "my mother depends on my wages. We have nowhere else to go." But her words fell on deaf ears. The Duke had already turned away, signaling the guards to remove her. As they grabbed her arms once more, Clara caught a final glimpse of Prince Edmund. He stood frozen, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. She saw the torment in his eyes, the struggle between duty and truth etched across his features, yet he remained silent. The guards dragged her toward the servants' exit, past the sneering faces of courtiers who had smiled at her just yesterday. Lady Isolde's triumphant smirk cut deeper than any blade. Clara's tears fell freely now as she stumbled between her escorts, her reputation destroyed, her future scattered like autumn leaves in a storm. As the heavy doors closed behind her, cutting off the whispers and judgment of the great hall. Clara heard nothing but the sound of her own ragged breathing and the steady footsteps of the guards. Her heart ached, not just for herself, but for the prince who had shown her such kindness, and whose silence now rang louder than any shout of protest could have done. The guards led her away through the gray morning light, toward an uncertain future, leaving behind the only world she had ever known. Clara's trembling hands gathered her few precious belongings, her mother's worn prayer book, 2 simple dresses, and the small wooden cross her father had carved before his death. The guards waited impatiently at her door, their breath visible in the cold morning air that seeped through the attic's thin walls. "Make haste," the shorter guard muttered, though his eyes held a hint of pity. Through the window, Clara could see dark clouds gathering above the palace grounds, promising snow despite autumn having barely settled in. Her heart ached as she wrapped her thin shawl around her shoulders, knowing it would provide little protection against the bitter weather ahead. The corridors she had cleaned countless times now felt foreign and hostile. Servants peered out from doorways and alcoves as the guards escorted her down the winding servant stairs. Some turned away in shame, while others whispered behind raised hands. The accusations of theft hung heavy in the air, though Clara knew in her heart she had never touched the missing jewels. As they reached the entrance hall, the morning light streaming through tall windows illuminated the gathered crowd. Kitchen maids, footmen, and even some of the lower nobility had assembled to witness her departure. Clara kept her head high, though her cheeks burned with humiliation. Near the palace gates, a small boy tugged at her skirts. His hollow cheeks and ragged clothes marked him as one of the beggar children who sometimes gathered hoping for kitchen scraps. Clara paused, earning a grunt of disapproval from her guards. Without hesitation, she reached into her pocket and withdrew her last coin, the single piece of silver she had saved for emergencies. She pressed it into the child's dirty palm, her voice soft but clear in the morning stillness. "God sees even the smallest sparrow," she whispered, managing a gentle smile despite her circumstances. "He will watch over you, little one." A collective murmur rippled through the gathered servants. Those who had shunned her these past days shifted uncomfortably, struck by the grace of her actions in the face of disgrace. Even the guards exchanged glances, their stern expressions softening momentarily. Unknown to Clara, Prince Edmund stood in the shadow of a marble column, his features tight with barely contained emotion. He watched as she gave away her last coin, and something within him crystallized into absolute certainty. The woman before him possessed a nobility that had nothing to do with birth or title, and everything to do with the contents of her heart. As Clara descended the palace steps, snowflakes began to fall, delicate and cruel in their timing. A shabby hired carriage waited at the bottom, its ancient wooden wheels already gathering frost. The driver, an elderly man with kind eyes, helped her climb inside. She settled onto the hard wooden seat, clutching her small bundle of possessions to her chest. Through the carriage's grimy window, she took one last look at the palace that had been her home since childhood. Its towering spires and gleaming windows now seemed to mock her, holding all the dreams and security she had lost. The driver clicked his tongue, and the tired horse began to move. With each turn of the wheels, Clara felt her heart growing heavier. She would never again polish these gates or sweep these paths, never again serve in the great hall, or tend the garden where she had once covered a sleeping prince with her shawl. The memory brought fresh tears to her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. As the carriage passed through the outer gates, the snow began to fall more heavily, obscuring her final view of the palace. Clara closed her eyes and whispered a prayer not for herself, but for those she left behind. For the little beggar boy, for the servants who had once been her friends, and yes, even for a certain prince, though she dared not speak his name even in her thoughts. The carriage rattled down the cobblestone street, carrying her away from everything she had ever known toward an uncertain future. The only warmth she had left was the knowledge that she had remained true to herself until the very end. The palace halls echoed with Edmund's purposeful strides as he made his way to the scriptorium. Night had fallen, but a faint light still flickered beneath the scribe's door. Edmund's heart thundered with urgency. Somewhere in the darkness, Clara traveled alone, unjustly banished. He found Mr. Aldwyn hunched over his desk, trembling fingers sorting through ledgers by candlelight. The scribe startled at Edmund's entrance, nearly upending his inkwell. "Your Highness." Aldwyn scrambled to stand, but Edmund waved him back down. "The treasury records from this week, if you please," Edmund commanded, his voice tight with restraint. "And speak truly. Did you notice anything unusual?" Aldwyn's thin face grew paler still. He glanced at the door, then back to Edmund, wringing his hands. "My lord, I dare not. Mr. Aldwyn." Edmund stepped closer, softening his tone. "I remember how Clara brought you soup and tended your fever last winter, when others feared to approach. Would you see her kindness repaid with injustice?" The scribe's shoulders slumped. With trembling hands, he withdrew a leather folder from beneath a stack of papers. "Lady Isolde brought these documents herself, demanding I enter them officially. But look here. The seal is wrong, the ink too fresh. And these figures." He pointed to several entries with shaking finger. "They don't match my original records." Edmund examined the papers, jaw clenching as he spotted the obvious forgeries. "You will testify to this?" Aldwyn swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Highness. Clara showed me mercy when I was ill. I cannot stay silent while she suffers." Without another word, Edmund gathered the evidence and strode toward the great hall. His father would be dining with the court nobles. Perfect. Let them all witness the truth. The heavy doors burst open under Edmund's push. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as heads turned. At the head table, the Duke of Westervale set down his wine glass, frowning at the interruption. "Father," Edmund's voice carried across the hall, "I must speak of justice." "This is hardly the time or place," the Duke began, but Edmund pressed forward. "I confess before all that I tested Clara Whitcomb." Edmund's words rang clear. "I feigned sleep in the garden, leaving a damaged book beside me. Any other servant might have ignored both book and sleeper, or worse, taken advantage." Whispers rustled through the hall. Edmund drew the ribbon from his pocket. "Instead, she covered me with her own shawl against the cool air. She mended my book with this ribbon from her apron. All this she did, believing no one watched, seeking no praise or reward." Lady Isolde rose from her seat, face flushing. "Pretty tricks to gain favor." Silence. Edmund's voice cracked like thunder. He thrust the forged documents toward his father. "Here is proof of the real deception. Mr. Aldwyn confirms these treasury records were falsified. The seal is counterfeit, the entries forged." The Duke took the papers, examining them with narrowed eyes. The hall held its breath. "And what of the missing jewels?" Lady Isolde demanded, though her voice wavered. "There are no missing jewels," Edmund declared. "Only missing honor, yours, cousin, when you sought to destroy an innocent woman through lies." The Duke raised his hand for silence. His stern gaze moved from the documents to his son's face, searching. "You stake much on this servant girl's innocence." "I stake everything on truth," Edmund replied. "Clara's father died protecting our family's interests. Now his daughter suffers for showing the very virtues we claim to uphold. Will we reward loyalty with injustice?" A long moment passed. The Duke's expression remained unreadable as he studied the forged papers. Finally, he stood. "Lady Isolde." His voice was cold as winter frost. "You will retire to your estates until further notice. Guards, send riders after the Whitcomb girl's carriage. Have her brought back with all honor due an innocent woman." Relief flooded Edmund's chest. Isolde's face twisted with rage. but 2 guards stepped forward to escort her from the hall. The assembled nobles buzzed with whispers and speculation. The Duke raised his voice above the murmurs. "Let it be known that Clara Whitcomb leaves this hall with her name cleared and her honor intact. Any who dare spread false rumors will answer to me directly." Edmund bowed to his father, heart lighter than it had been in days. Soon Clara would return, her reputation restored. Justice, though delayed, had not been denied. A fine carriage emblazoned with the Westervale crest rolled through the palace gates, its wheels crunching on fresh gravel. Inside, Clara sat with trembling hands folded in her lap, her heart fluttering like a caged bird. The sudden summons and honor of a ducal carriage left her bewildered after hours of exile on the rough road. As footmen helped her descend, the courtyard seemed to swim before her eyes. Would there be more accusations, more shame? But there, striding across the stones, came Prince Edmund himself. Clara's breath caught as he approached, his bearing both regal and tender. To her astonishment, and the gasps of gathered onlookers, Edmund knelt before her on one knee. "Miss Clara Whitcomb," he declared, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed yard. "Your virtue has touched my heart. Your kindness has opened my eyes. I love you, and I ask for your hand in marriage." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes as she struggled to find words. "My lord, I am but a servant." "You are the daughter of a hero," Edmund corrected gently, "and the woman who has won my heart." The Duke of Westervale descended the palace steps, his expression stern yet softened somehow. "Rise, both of you," he commanded. Looking at Clara, he spoke with quiet authority. "I have learned that true nobility dwells not in titles, but in character. You have shown yourself worthy of my son's love and our family's name." "The band shall be read immediately," the Duke continued, raising his voice to address the growing crowd. "And I decree that all who dwell within these walls, from the highest born to the humblest servant, shall attend the betrothal feast tonight." Joy spread through the courtyard like sunrise. Servants who had defended Clara embraced her, while those who had doubted begged forgiveness. Even some of the nobles who had scorned her now came forward with congratulations. That evening, the great hall blazed with hundreds of candles. Servants filled the galleries, their faces bright with excitement as they watched their own Clara, now dressed in silk, step onto the dance floor with their prince. Edmund drew her into his arms as the musicians began to play. "When you lay beneath the lime tree," Clara whispered as they moved to the music, "and I covered you with my shawl, I never dreamed you were truly watching." Edmund's eyes sparkled with love as he held her close. "I have never seen more clearly in my life," he replied softly. The candlelight caught the tears of joy in Clara's eyes as they danced, surrounded by the cheers and blessings of all who witnessed love's triumph over pride and circumstance. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.